heading into the early hours of Thursday, and with the cloud and the breeze, again, frost-free for the vast majority. Temperatures first thing 7 or 8 Celsius typically. But a cloudy start, I think, on Thursday. A bit more cloud in the sky for a time for many, but increasingly cloud breaks for central and eastern England, parts of eastern Scotland, whilst the cloud thickens to the west and northwest of the UK and some heavy rain moves in as we end the day. That's an active weather front. It'll bring a short spell of wet and windy weather as it crosses the country, but it clears to sunny spells and blustery showers on Friday, and those temperatures will drop.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
On tonight's Mark Steyn Show, live on your telly, live on your wireless, live on your Windows 98 desktop, did you see Boris Johnson taunting Keir Starmer about his alleged failure to prosecute Jimmy Savile? We're all eager to hear the details on the big-time pedos when they're top-of-the-pops disc jockeys from the 1970s. But when it's happening right now, every day, in towns up and down the land, with the connivance of officialdom, suddenly it's a big yawneroo. Also tonight, is French politics way butcher than the UK's? And Ukraine. Joe Biden and Liz Truss purport to be loaded for Russian bear. But is this real warmongering or just pseudo-warmongering? Strictly come warmongering for Washington think tanks rather than real tanks. And the only part of the show that really matters, your questions and comments. Let me know what's on your mind via email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or by tweet at GB News. All that coming up after Miranda and the news.
Thank you. Good evening. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says Russia's 100,000 troops on Ukraine's border is the biggest demonstration of hostility in our lifetime. Speaking at a news conference in Kiev with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Boris Johnson added that Moscow should step back. A call with Russia's President Vladimir Putin has been rescheduled for tomorrow afternoon. The Prime Minister urged the Kremlin to now choose the path of diplomacy.
It goes without saying that a further Russian invasion of Ukraine would be a political disaster, a humanitarian disaster. In my view, it would also be, for Russia, for the world, a military disaster as well.
Well, back home, Downing Street says the public will be told if Boris Johnson is fined for breaching lockdown rules. Number 10 had previously implied the information might not be disclosed, saying it was a matter for the Met Police. The Prime Minister has apologised after the Sue Gray report found failures of leadership and judgment. He says everything that can be published will be once the inquiries have been completed. The Manchester United footballer Mason Greenwood has been further arrested on suspicion of sexual assault and threats to kill. The 20-year-old Premier League player was first arrested on Sunday on suspicion of rape and assault of a young woman. It follows social media images and videos being posted online. Greater Manchester Police say detectives have been granted more time to question him. A driver who used his car to stop a knife man as he stabbed a woman in London has been released without charge. Met Police say the motorist, who's known as Abraham, has been released after officers reviewed the law around self-defence and defence of another. They say they consider the 26-year-old a vital witness rather than a suspect. And a fire has broken out at a car garage in West London, closing a nearby tube station. Around 10 fire engines and 70 firefighters have been tackling the large blaze at a single-storey car garage in Acton. The cause of the fire is unknown at this stage and no injuries reported, but travel through nearby Acton Town tube station has been affected. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Steyn.
As recently as the 18th century, 25% of all unmarried females in Britain's capital city were prostitutes. The average age of a London whore was 16, and many brothels prided themselves on offering only girls under the age of 14. In the 1790s, a respectable gentleman, a solid citizen, could walk past an 11-year-old prostitute on a London street without feeling a twinge of disgust or outrage. He accepted her as merely a feature of the landscape, like an ugly hill or a misshapen tree when you're strolling in the country. The man who helped destroy that cruel casual assumption was William Wilberforce, a backbench member of Parliament, of rather greater distinction than most of those in the present House of Commons, as Wilberforce wrote in 1787, "God Almighty has set before me two great objects, the suppression of the slave trade and the reformation of manners." We know about the first of those great objects. Wilberforce did more than any other single human being to help eradicate slavery from most of the world. But the latter goal was perhaps even tougher. Nevertheless, he did it. A century later, there were still child prostitutes, but there were also charities and improvement societies and orphanages, and the Victorian concept of a social conscience. Are English cities now returning to the state of London a quarter millennium back? A society that accepts the abuse, the exploitation, and the degradation of its most vulnerable girls? A new report from the Independent Inquiry on Child Sexual Abuse says yes. And if you're thinking, oh yeah, Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, well no, this report chose to focus not on any of the criminal cases you may have heard about, but a random sampling of places where, if there is grooming gang activity, you haven't heard about it. From Tower Hamlets in the East End to Warwickshire, Shakespeare's County, leafy. Very leafy. Their conclusion, quote, children are sexually exploited by networks. That's grooming gangs, a term that is unsatisfactory and ultimately euphemistic. Accepted in all parts of England and Wales in the most degrading and destructive ways, unquote. And the failures of South Yorkshire police and social workers in Rotherham a decade or more back remain the failures of almost all other constabularies and government bureaucracies today. In particular, the need to blame the victims, which we've talked about before on this show. You're a 13-year-old girl in foster care, shanghaied in a cab, to go and have sex with a dozen men who then urinate on you, douse you in petrol and dance around you with lighted matches. And the authorities describe you as, quote, promiscuous and putting yourself at risk and placing yourself in situations of vulnerability. So there's a lot of victim blaming from the authorities in Warwickshire, in Tower Hamlets, in Bristol, Merseyside, South Wales. And there's a remarkable lack of curiosity about the perpetrators, so that despite instruction from Priti Patel and the Home Office, the police still don't bother recording the particular characteristics of the gang members. From the criminal prosecutions, they would appear to be significantly, quote, Asian in the preferred and faintly ludicrous euphemism of Fleet Street. If you read out the names of, say, those convicted in Huddersfield, Zahid Hassan, Mohammed Kama, Mohammed Rizwan Aslam, they might appear to have certain things in common. A lot of Mohammeds and Ahmeds among the perpetrators. But as this report is at pains to point out, this all might be totally unrepresentative and very unfair. And all the rest are called Nigel and Jeremy and Peregrine and Tarquin, because Britain's useless coppers are keeping all the most basic details to themselves, so we don't know. What we do know is that there isn't a lot to be said for any society that, as in Wilberforce's day, accepts the sex slavery of large numbers of its daughters as merely a fact of life. What we know happened in Rotherham, Rochdale and elsewhere is shameful. When a society declines to be ashamed, that is far worse and very telling. I first met the victims of Rotherham 6 years ago now, and there isn't a thing in this 193-page report that I didn't hear from those girls back then, including the fact that it's still going on. What do you make of all this? What do you make of officialdom's response to this? You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at GBNews. Maggie Oliver knows a bit about this because she led the Greater Manchester Police investigation into their handling of the Rochdale child sex gangs and then wound up leaving the force. Maggie, just to get your particular situation out of the way, the subtext of this report is that in many ways the police are an obstacle to the truth about this situation getting out into the world. Would that be a fair summary of your experience in Manchester?
Yeah, I mean, my work isn't just in Manchester anymore, Mark. You know, I set up the Maggie Oliver Foundation after I resigned from Greater Manchester Police. So this is not just a problem that exists in Manchester. My work with the foundation now, we support victims and survivors throughout the whole of the UK. And we hear every single day, still, more than 10 years after I resigned from Greater Manchester Police, that victims are being blamed, that they are being failed, that statutory agencies are failing them on a monumental scale. They are being blamed and judged. And this report makes it very clear that even the 6 police forces that were part of this inquiry, they were unable to provide proper evidence about what happened in their own areas. There was no accurate understanding of grooming gangs or organised networks, if you want to call it that. And really, there was an institutional determination not to intervene. It also finds that a lot of the time that the protecting the organisation when the failures are exposed is largely to do with trying to avoid bad publicity. There are cover-ups. The report itself says that the data that was presented to this inquiry was, I think the words used were confused and confusing. I would go much further and I would say they were untrue and misleading, and there was a deliberate attempt by the police forces that were called to give evidence in this review to conceal the truth and pretend there was no problem. I was a core participant in this part of the ICSA inquiry, and I've been highly critical actually of the lack of inclusion of towns and cities like Rochdale and Rotherham and Oxford and Telford and all the northern towns and cities where this particular kind of abuse occurs. But actually, I think by focusing on areas that wouldn't normally be seen to be associated with this kind of offending, I think it's made it even clearer that the problem is nationwide. It is not just in particular areas, and it is not being addressed. There is a complete lack of data collection. That is one of the keys, and that is what we in my charity, in the Maggie Oliver Foundation, we have been collecting data for over 18 months now. We know a great deal about what's going on. We've shared this information with the Home Secretary. You know, we go to police forces every single day, and we have had a monumental fight to get police forces to take victims' allegations of rape. This is not child abuse, it is child rape on a pretty industrial scale. And we find victims and survivors being dismissed, being pushed away, traumatized further. So it's a horrendous indictment of the failures going on in our country today.
Well, I find it. Yes, carry on.
I was just going to say what I would say, Mark, is that I'm very grateful that GBNews keep the spotlight on this. And, you know, you only have to look at the coverage today of the Prime Minister and the Partygate. That has been going on for months. This particular kind of offending and the failures of the authorities have been going on for 10 years. And yet we get a little bit of a snapshot of something, and then the focus goes off it again. And every year there are thousands of children being failed, new generations every time. And, you know, it's all right having a report that talks about this, but really this report isn't saying anything that I haven't been saying for 10 years. It could be me that has written this report, actually. But have we seen any real changes in the past 10 years? That is the issue. Nobody has been held accountable. People, you know, make excuses, avoid the truth, and try to pretend that everything's hunky-dory. Well, it isn't. And organisations like the
Let's try and break this down a bit, Maggie, because you say you've known about it, you know, for over a decade. I've known about it almost that long, and I'm not an expert. I was just curious as to why no one seemed to care about these girls. These girls are written off as, quote, white slags or, quote, packy shaggers, and they take their stories to the police. The police, in at least one case in Rotherham, the young lady in question brought in her diary with contemporaneous notes of everything that had happened to her to give to the police as evidence. The police managed to lose it. So the question becomes here, you know, the British police have traditionally, by standards around the world, had a good reputation. And there have been occasions when, under extreme circumstances, that reputation has come in to question. Whoever it was in Europe who found out about the Royal Ulster Constabulary's shoot to kill policy and things like that, that's a very extreme situation. There's a low-grade civil war going on, and police start to behave in unusual ways. Why is it then that up and down the spine of England, perfectly ordinary English constabularies, not in the situation of the RSC, are behaving in utterly disgraceful ways that should shame this nation?
I think there's a whole number of reasons that feed into this. I have to say that, you know, I was a police officer, and I was a good police officer, and there are good police officers. What I would say is that there are not enough of them, that the ones often dealing with, for instance, this report refers to children in care who often go missing from home. Now, officers sent to take those reports are often new, that they're uniform officers, they're not long in service, they don't understand what abuse does to a child, and a child mistrusts authority. I think we need a real overhaul of how we deal with child abuse, that we bring organisations like the Foundation in to work with police forces. At the moment, even as a charity who specialises in sexual abuse, in rape, we are treated in a way as an outsider. We don't have any real influence. We can campaign and we can fight the corner of the victim, but the authorities have no obligation to listen to what we're saying. And that is one of the problems, that the ones who really understand what's going on and really want to move this forward, like the Maggie Oliver Foundation, like the Children's Society, like Parents Against Child Exploitation, we are kept on the outside. I think the time has come to bring organisations like us into the middle of the debate and to be involved in protecting children, because the police forces have shown themselves to be wholly inadequate in doing it. They don't put victims at the centre of the case.
Well, let me just drill down on that, whether it's inadequacy or something more, because you know as well as I do that there are millions of people throughout the UK who think that in fact there is an identity politics sensitivity aspect to this. That because when you look into the gangs, as we just saw in the conviction of Lord Ahmed in Rotherham, very powerful figure, and his two brothers, very powerful figure, and you don't want to cross these guys, because apart from anything else, they can get you into trouble if you're perceived to be racist or Islamophobic or all the rest of it. This report, for example, I think the only mention it makes, time it uses the word Muslim when it makes reference to a program looking into whether Muslim girls are the victims of this phenomenon. Is there a racial, cultural, ethnic component of this, that policemen, ordinary constables, as you say, may be poorly trained, but they know enough to know I've got to stay away from that, or I'm going to be tied up in sensitivity training hell for the next 6 months, and it'll be a black mark on my career till I retire? Because that's what a lot of people think.
You know what? I think this report makes it very clear that the data that we need is not being collected. The question to be asked is why not? I am in no way, shape or form racist. And I don't care whether it's a Catholic priest abusing children or whether it's, Jeffrey Epstein. The law is the law. And if a man raped a child of 11 or 12 or 13, for me, he deserves the full weight of the law against him. I think it is very clear that there are fears around looking at the background of many of the offenders in the traditional grooming gang cases. And I think my opinion is that we should not shy away from exploring why sort of South Asian men from a predominantly Pakistani background are predominantly engaged in this kind of offending. I think we need the data in order to try to understand why that is. I think we need to work together with communities from which the abusers come to try to understand why they are overrepresented in these cases. But I would say, from the perspective of the Foundation, that child abuse and rape as a whole is being dealt with inadequately, because we support victims not just from traditional grooming gangs. We are approached by victims and survivors every day who have been raped by lots of different kinds of perpetrators. And sadly, the authorities are failing those victims too. And you have to wonder why that is. Is it deliberate? Is it lack of training? Is it actually partly because they feel that by pushing victims away, they will be able to lessen the workload? Because these cases, particularly the grooming gang cases, they are extremely difficult to investigate. They are very time consuming. They are very resource intensive. So police forces in general don't really want to take them on. I mean, the thing that
we can't have that, Maggie. We've got, just in the last couple of days, we've got Scottish police doing their... Police Scotland is an absolute disgrace. They're just going around to some woman who made a statement that they think of as transphobic and asking her to explain the logic behind her... They're investigating thought crime on Twitter, which even the dystopian novels is so stupid, even the dystopian novels didn't get around to invite. Then we've got in West Yorkshire, where the Huddersfield case took place, we've got the West Yorkshire Constabulary sending its female officers out in undercover catcall patrols so that if some bloke in a white van yells out the window, "Sure, love, you don't get many of them to the pound," they pull him over and they instantly ticket him. So we got the police doing the police have determined their priorities. Stupid tweets and stupid stunts, to the point where 94% of crime in this country does not... But this is different. Because this is different. It's women, it's our most vulnerable young girls. It goes back decades. In Telford, it goes back to virtually the time. It's a new town. It didn't get going till the 70s, and this grooming stuff goes on basically to the creation of the town. There's something sick in the British police that has to be addressed on a national scale.
I think I would go back to what I've just said, though, that we are, in a way, at risk as a country of just dealing with the easiest crimes to investigate and prosecute. You know, these cases are extremely difficult, and it's much easier to deal with somebody who's perhaps, you know, engaged in a public order offence. It is much easier to blame a young victim who shouts abuse at her abuser, rather than investigate the abuser and the gang behind him for abusing that child. You know, we're supporting victims who have been criminalised for their abuse, and that hasn't stopped. Even in this report, Mark, that the head of the CPS, Greg McGill, he was called as a witness, and he tried to justify what had happened to the victims in the Rochdale grooming gang cases. That one of them, as a child of 15, had been secretly put on the indictment of one of the gang of abusers because it was a tactical way of getting her evidence into court. What he didn't go on to say was that the social services then tried to take her children away from her based on the fact that she'd secretly been accused of being a paedophile. Now, that is picking on the victims. It is taking an easy option, and it is not doing... that they are not doing the job of the police, which is to prosecute serial paedophiles, serial child abusers. You know, it's easy to stop somebody speaking on the mobile phone in a car. It's very easy in many respects. You look at what's happened today, Mark, with the Manchester United, the Manchester United player who is accused of abuse. Well, I can tell you of the dozens of cases that we deal of victims who have been waiting for the police to act for many months and still haven't had their perpetrators arrested. So they are becoming an organisation that reacts when the media focuses on them, you know, and that is what is part of the problem that exists today. They hide behind public relations department that cover up failures. They are frightened of getting bad publicity. They downplay CSE. They blame. They don't collect data. So there's a whole sequence of reasons that feed into this. Is not an easy solution, but we have no accountability.
But it is. But
we've had no.
But the very example you've given, and the fact that Boris Johnson used the Jimmy Savile taunt against Keir Starmer in the House of Commons yesterday, shows he thinks it has some salience. So the best way for any of these grooming gangs of Pakistani Muslim origin to get themselves in trouble with the police would be if Ahmed or Mohammed had hosted Midday Spin on Radio 1 in 1968, the coppers would be all over him then, because it would be part of their little celebrity PR thing. But we're going to have to leave it there, Maggie. We've gone on longer than we'd scheduled, but we'll have to have you back. We're going to stay on this story, and we'll have you back to talk about it some more, because it's disgraceful that it's been known about now for 7 years, and it's still going on, and new techniques are still being used. Maggie Oliver, thank you. New techniques are being introduced, as this report makes clear. Maggie Oliver, thank you. Coming up, is French politics butcher than the present state of UK politics? Plus, we'll get your reaction, and don't forget Stump the Steyn, GB Views at gbnews.uk. Don't go anywhere. We're coming right back.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hey, let us get straight to your tweets and emails. We wanted to know, is the nation in denial about the realities of grooming gangs? Ruth says, I'm not in denial. The establishment are, though. I don't think they're in denial. I think they know a little bit about what's actually going on, but they don't know what to do about it that maintains their political viability. And that's the issue. A Twitter user says, who expands the point, it's the ruling classes that are in denial, as it's a truth they don't want to deal with. Loretta says it's a lot worse than denial, it's systemic complicity. They're all in the same gang. I don't think it's actually possible to talk to the girls in Rotherham without concluding that. The police knew all these guys by name. They'd often come by. Well, one police officer came back and had a chat, pulled up his cruiser and had a chat with, in his jam sandwich, with the grooming gang guy as a sexual act was being performed by a 12-year-old girl. It's completely disgraceful. And the lack of interest from the political class. All these people who are exercised about cake. It's disgraceful that this is still going on. Anyway, sorry I'm getting a little too worked up. I ought to have to go back to having that smooth television presenter calm about me. Stump the Steyn is coming up a little bit later, so keep your tweets and emails coming. All the fire-breathing populist A-listers on the continent have been meeting in Madrid. France's Marine Le Pen, Hungary's Viktor Orban, Poland's Mateusz Morawiecki. I'm so worked up I can't pronounce Polish names. They had a, look at this, they had a big curved table. And simultaneous translation device. Yeah, there we are. Look at that. Simultaneous translation devices, just like all the sinister globalists do at their get-togethers. That's Marine Le Pen looking delightful in the front. And then you can see way down, I think he's second from the right. That's Viktor Orban from Hungary. But looks great. Looks like any old summit table at Davos or whatever. If you're wondering who the UK delegate was in Madrid, well, we're not in the European Union, so we don't get to go. But even if we were in the EU, who would we have sent to a gathering of right-wing populists? British electors vote overwhelmingly for left-wing parties. Labour, Lib Dem, SNP, Plaid Cymru, Sinn Féin. Oh, I've left one out. Which is it again? Oh, yes, the Carrie Johnson Tories. In France, by contrast, the left is on the ropes. They won't have a candidate in the final round of the coming presidential election. I don't know quite where you'd place Monsieur Macron on the left-right scale, but in 2017, although we didn't know it, he tonally prefigured the ascetic, bloodless technocrats of the COVID era, commanding you to stay in your bedsit until further notice, but without giving the impression that there's anything particularly lefty or righty about it. Just dispassionate, rational examination of the evidence. Monsieur Macron is phenomenally unpopular, but that apparently doesn't make any difference to getting through to the final round, where he'll face one of three right-wing candidates. Madame Le Pen, who is hemorrhaging supporters to Éric Zemmour, the author and media commentator. Fans of Marine are supposed to be reassured by the fact that her nonagenarian dad hasn't betrayed her. He agreed to have lunch with her and promised that he's not going to abandon her, even though he says he found Monsieur Zemmour, quote, likeable, which is not something Jean-Marie Le Pen often says about Jews. If it were not for the rivalry between Zemmour and Madame Le Pen, the populist right would be assured of having a candidate in the runoff. Instead, the beneficiary could well be Valérie Pécresse, who, notwithstanding a few recent genuflections, would pretty much get the bum's rush at that Madrid summit. I'm so unexcited by him that, having assumed he was a chap like Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, I belatedly Googled him the other day and was stunned to find he's a woman. Anyway, a couple of years back, Madame Pécresse declared she was going to position herself halfway between Macron's government and what she described as right-wing aggressive opposition. I don't know what you'd call her subtle triangulation. Ineffectual opposition, aggressive indifference, compliant ineffectualism. But when it all gets too complicated for dilettante foreign observers, we are always glad to see Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, a doyenne of Parisian commentators. You can read her in The Telegraph, and we always do with great interest. Anne-Elisabeth, just to go back to where I started, it does seem that French politics has moved more right than, for example, UK politics in recent years. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Right now, the combined votes for all those 7 or 8, possibly 9, they change all the time, candidate representing left-wing parties, struggle to get 30% of the vote. It is so arcane and so inside baseball that I'm not going to go in all the details of the various things that they call primaries. The last one was 2 weeks ago, and the people who did best is someone who scored 3% in general voting intention. So the French left is completely in disarray. The question is whether it was killed by François Hollande, the hapless president who could not even run again and who was was overtaken by Emmanuel Macron, formerly one of his ministers, or whether it's that the French have veered rightwards. And it's a combination of both. But I would say that the French have veered rightwards mostly for a reason that the electorate in Britain or in the United States would understand very well, which is that there are whole swathes of the population who feel that nobody is listening to them. And there are now voices out there who try and listen and say, we heard you. You are in the French equivalent of flyover country, which, the French call la France périphérique, peripheral France. It doesn't mean it's at the borders. It means it's peripheral to everybody's interest and attention.
Yeah, and when you say it has similarities with the American and British situation, it does up to a point. But for example, Monsieur Zemmour's great thing, le grand remplacement, the great replacement, which is the demographic eclipse of native France by immigrants that has led to what is the best-selling book title, The Lost Territories, these parts of the French Republic where the writ of the French state no longer runs. You can't say that on American TV or UK TV without self-detonating your career. And I know that well. I was talking to Tucker Carlson on American television on Fox News, and he brought it up. And the next thing I didn't even mention it. But people wanted me to be vaporized along with him just for race. So in some ways, the Overton window, as you called it last time, seems to have been moved in France so that these things are now discussable.
Well, yes and no. They are being discussed, but on the other hand, you've got a number of judicial attacks against Éric Zemmour, because what we're getting is polarization, with the right being more sort of standing up for itself, and the left also standing up for itself, and more than just the left, but this sort of soft wokeism which is coming to France, and which is going to be like what it is in Britain and America. The difference is possibly 5 years, but we're getting there. So you both have people who talk about the grand remplacement, and even though it's described diversely by the number of people who talk about it, but the book you quoted is interesting, Les territoires perdus de la République, the lost territories of the Republic, because that is not at all a book by Éric Zemmour. He has used it. It's a book by a sociologist, Michel Tribala, who is an absolutely bona fide academic and who described things without drawing any kind of political conclusions from this. France is a country of mathematicians. We have lots of very good statistics, possibly too much used for technocrats, but by and large, the facts were known, they were just not being named. And what happened in the last 10 years, I would say, is that they have started being named.
Yeah, that's very that's interesting, and that's significant. Éric Zemmour, there's a theory that I've seen reported that he knows he's not going to be president, but he's thinking about 2027, and his object here in defeating Marine Le Pen or in preventing Marine Le Pen from advancing to the next round is to create the conditions for the unification of the right. By which we mean the squish right and the hard right, but on terms that are harder after this election. Do you buy that?
I not only buy this, I've been hearing him saying it in the past month or two. He calls it l'union des droites, the union of the rights. He's been peeling off supporters not just from Marine Le Pen's party, but also from the harder side of the Républicain Party, which is Valérie Pécresse. She's not somebody who's interested in this, but either she wins, in which case she will have to win the legislative elections in 1 month after the presidential election, and to have MPs, she will have to compose with a harder right of her own party. Or she loses, in which case she is literally history, and then the legislative elections are being sort of led by the parties that did best. It is expected that Macron will win at the end of the day, because The French can both have lots of feelings about various things and hate expressing them frankly. We are a country that does a great deal of circumlocution in the way we speak. But what's really interesting is, of course, is the right-wing party, the big party, that would be the Tory party in Britain, the Républicains, do they remain the same, or do they integrate large swathes of the vote that went to the right-wing candidates? Polls are changing all the time, but basically the variations are small. You have Macron, who's between 23 and 25%. You have Pécresse, Zemmour, and Le Pen, all between 15 and 18%. Le Pen is probably second, but it's a whisker. It's within the margin of error. And after that, you've got both Pécresse and Zemmour, who practically poll the same thing. So it's a great mystery right now. We don't know yet.
Yeah, or each of those three candidates on the right needs something that's going to open up some real non-margin of error gap and put them into a clear second place, but we haven't seen that as yet. Thank you as always. And I find I'm bored comatose by Partygate. I have no interest in Boris Johnson's cake. I didn't have any interest when I was sharing cake with him at The Spectator. Never mind now when I don't get the cake. And French politics, by comparison, is far more lively and talking about, in fact, things that we should be talking about here instead of cake. So we thank you, Anne Elizabeth, for your insight as always.
I'd like to make one point, if I have 1 second, which is on Marine Le Pen.
Okay.
Marine Le Pen has seen people betraying her left or right. Strangely enough, it is making her more sympathetic to the voters, because they suddenly feel that she has taken this with great stoicism. She says more or less the same things that Éric Zemmour, but she looks more moderate, and she might be the clear winner of the first round after all. We don't know, but that's an interesting theory that's now being mooted by commenters in France.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point. I mean, she actually is looking more sympathetic and humane, because a lot of people aren't just saying, well, I like Zemmour more like Marine more than Le Pen. They're people who are in her inner circle and are picking the most damaging time to screw her over. So even the human drama. I mean, Boris and Cakegate really is not even proper human drama compared to what's going on in Marine's circle. Thank you for that. That was an excellent point, well worth making. When we return, the received wisdom says that Vladimir Putin is not going to invade Ukraine until Chairman Xi has wrapped up the Chinese Olympics. After that, who knows? Perhaps the Taliban will persuade him to hold off until after the new season of the Afghan Strictly. We'll try to figure out what's really going on with Conrad Black. And don't forget to stump the Steyn. Ask me anything. GB Views at gbnews.uk. We're coming right back.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, is it time for Sage and government officials to finally be held to account for nudging us into lockdown oblivion? Dr. Gary Sidley, the top psychologist who prompted an investigation into the pandemic's grossly unethical scare tactics, joins me. Plus, GB News stars Nigel Farage and Darren Grimes give unfiltered takes on the matters that matter to you. And I break down the day's top headlines with my superstar panel. Conservative commentator Calvin Robinson, Daily Star columnist Dawn Neeson, and author and journalist Rebecca Reed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, airing Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
GB News on TV and radio. Only a week ago, I was quoting the famous words of Sir Edward Grey in that last Edwardian summer of 1914. The lamps are going out all over Europe. But this time it's because Vladimir Putin controls the electricity supply. But according to the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, as we discussed the other day, Putin has been distracted by Jacinda Trudeau into planting tens of thousands of Russian agents into the Canadian trucking industry. So there is a pause on what my next guest calls the Gilbert and Sullivan warmongering. Ukraine and Russia is a bit like Ireland and England. It's not quite as simple as one might wish, and certainly nowhere near simple enough for the incompetents who run the Pentagon. Just as there are Irish who wish to be solely Irish, and there are Irish who wish to be both Irish and British, so there are Ukrainians who wish to be solely Ukrainian, and there are Ukrainians who would be perfectly happy to be Russian. Tsar Putin would like them to be Russian because Russia is getting somewhat short of Russians. Russia's population fell from 147 million to 142 million in the 20 years up to 2010. It then slightly reversed in the last decade and has now begun sinking again. Mr. Putin thinks all Russians should live in Russia and that majority Russian territories in Ukraine should be part of Russia. He certainly doesn't want majority Russian territories being conscripted into NATO. Whether Americans, Britons or Europeans seriously want to go to war over that remains to be seen. Here now is Lord Black, whose newspaper group ran The Telegraph and The Spectator until the dirty, stinking, rotten, corrupt US Department of Justice destroyed it all. Conrad, can I ask you about, to expand on what you meant about Gilbert and Sullivan war making? It was a rather striking phrase.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. What I meant was that no sane leader conducts an invasion the way this invasion, if that's what it was, is being conducted by the Russians. You don't draw the forces up, make a spectacle of them before the entire world, and go on for weeks and weeks with people speculating about what you're going to do. And all the while, the target country is importing valuable defensive weapons. We're not talking about the Germans now who are supplying helmets that caused the mayor of Kiev to ask if pillows would be next. We are talking about anti-tank weapons and other useful defense weapons being supplied by the United Kingdom, the United States, and others. And at the same time, the chief amplification of this so-called war threat is coming from the United States. And I think we have to look at what the motives are here. The Americans have made it clear they're not prepared to deploy forces. Anyone would know that Russia would not be deterred or particularly inconvenienced by economic sanctions, especially as the Chinese and probably Germany would ignore them. So what we have is the Russians attempting to stage a sort of intimidation of Ukraine, and the Americans attempting, the American administration attempting to magnify the tensions And you have to assume that since the Americans know the Russians aren't really going to invade, they think that the only way that Biden can restore some of his lost popularity is to look purposeful in the world, and this is a way to do it. And the Russians, for their part, having put on a show of strength, know perfectly well that Ukraine is not being admitted to NATO. There's no thought of that at all. It's not worked and succeeded as a self-governing country yet. So on the confirmation that they're not at the moment entering NATO, Putin can claim a victory, and as the crisis subsides, Biden can claim to the ever-partisan, rabidly partisan, and gullible American media that his firm, calm stance has gained a victory for stability and justice in Central Europe. And it looks like theater more than geostrategy. And you have these esoteric things. I mean, other NATO countries sending forces to countries that aren't under threat in small numbers as a kind of gesture. Just like secondary figures moving around a stage. I mean, look, I don't mean to make light of it. It's a serious business, but the Russians aren't. If the Russians were going to invade, they would have invaded, seized the opportunity for surprise, and done pretty much what they did in Crimea. Except they can't do all of that in Ukraine with 120,000 or whatever it is soldiers. I mean, it's a country of nearly 40 million, and you would need a much larger armed forces than that. So I think the Russians are making a gesture for a limited objective that they know they're going to attain because Ukraine can't enter NATO now. And NATO has said that. And the Americans, the administration, are magnifying it to the unlimited credulity of their docile national political media. And in order to try and make Biden look like a strong leader, like JFK at the missile crisis, when the Kremlin does not go to war and the whole issue settles down. So that's what it looks like to me. Now, on the other hand, there is a time bomb. There is what used to be called an irredentist problem. There are a lot of Russians living in Ukraine who, like the Sudetenlanders in Czechoslovakia in 1938, would rather have been Germans. You have a lot of Russians on the Ukraine-Russian border who would rather be in Russia. And something is going to have to be done about that eventually, but it has to be done with sensible negotiations conducted by serious people. And right now, I don't see any serious people capable of conducting those negotiations.
Well, you're right. This whole thing that Joe Biden has given NATO a renewed sense of purpose because the Belgians have sent 8 elderly infantrymen to Estonia or whatever, which is what's going on at the moment, is completely ludicrous.
Does it distract? Who came in equal numbers.
Yeah. That's right. Does it detract from the main issue here, which is that America was just humiliated in Afghanistan, and actually that useless bunch of parade generals, to use a Commonwealth expression, should actually be sitting around seriously examining whether the American way of war still works? Just quickly, Conrad, we've only got a minute left.
Yeah, look, always up until now in the history of NATO, even those who disagreed with the United States acknowledged its military competence. And Afghanistan has called that into question. And obviously, the present chairman of the Joint Chiefs is hallucinating that he's Douglas MacArthur and should have been court-martialed 2 years ago. But I think
he's got more
the U.S. credibility.
He's got more ribbons than MacArthur.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
he's actually the most decorated officer.
He's got ribbons from shoulder. Yeah, he's got ribbons from shoulder down to past his kneecaps.
It's like a South American junta member. He can hardly get his tunic on. There's so many ribbons on it.
No, I know, and they're all for things like they're all for rubbish like acing transgender awareness class and all this. We'll have to have you back to talk about the awful state of the American.
We got sanity of the president.
Yeah, no, absolutely terrible. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining us, Conrad. We're all out of time, so I'll get to some of the Stump the Steyn stuff tomorrow at the top of the show. That's going to do it for me. You're in for a killer 2 hours, though, so don't touch that dial because Dan Wootton's here to titillate your Tuesday. See you tomorrow. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello again. Following some brighter skies at times on Tuesday, a lot more cloud will feed in from the west during the next 24 hours, and that cloud will contain some rain in the north, and it will contain mild air. That mild air coming in from the west and southwest around the edge of this high pressure. Low pressure moving away, so the isobars starting to move further apart in the north. That means it's going to become less windy for the far north of Scotland.